You know that feeling, right? You've just seen a movie that you think is an absolute masterpiece, but your friend thinks it's total garbage, and you both just dig in your heels. It raises this massive question. Is good taste just a matter of opinion, or are some judgments about art actually better than others? Well, the 18th century philosopher David Hume wrestled with this exact problem, and today we're going to walk through his incredible solution. So, let's get into it.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with this big problem, what we're calling the paradox of taste. Then, we'll get into Hume's idea that beauty is really just a feeling. After that, we'll see how we can get past our own biases to find what he calls a general point of view, which introduces us to his concept of the true critic. And to wrap it all up, we're going to tackle a really cool puzzle. Why on earth do we love sad stories?
Okay, so first up, the paradox of taste. Let's get right into that argument we've all had. Is there really a right or wrong answer when we're talking about a great song, a good book, or a beautiful painting?
So, is good taste just an opinion? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because Hume noticed something really weird about how we all talk and act when it comes to art. We're all walking contradictions, and we probably don't even see it.
So look at this. It really breaks down the massive gap between what we say and what we do. On one hand, we say stuff like, hey, to each their own, or there's no accounting for taste. We act like it's all just personal preference. But then we turn around and argue about it all the time. I mean, if your friend says some objectively terrible movie is the greatest film ever made, you're not just going to nod along, right? You're going to say, no way, that's absurd. So what gives? Is it personal, or is there a real standard? This is the paradox that Hume wanted to solve.
Okay, so how does Hume start to untangle this mess? Well, his first big move is to ask, what even is beauty? And his answer is a total game changer. He basically says beauty isn't in the painting or the song. Nope, it's in us. It's a feeling happening inside our own minds.
Now, to really get what Hume is saying, we've got to understand one key word he uses: sentiment. In his time, this just meant a feeling or an emotion. For Hume, when we're talking about art, it's really about the feeling of approval, what he called approbation, or the feeling of disapproval. Think of these feelings as the building blocks for every opinion we have about what's good or bad. And this quote from Hume, it just nails it. He says taste is a productive faculty. That's a fancy way of saying our minds aren't just cameras passively taking pictures of beauty that's already out there. Instead, our minds are more like projectors. We're gilding or staining the world with our own internal feelings, basically creating beauty and ugliness ourselves. It's like we're raising a new creation.
So here's the bottom line. Beauty isn't some property of an object, like its color or its weight. It's simply the feeling of pleasure that object sparks inside your mind. That feeling is the beauty. Now that's a huge shift, right? It makes beauty totally subjective. But wait, if it's all just a feeling, doesn't that throw us right back into that initial paradox?
Exactly. If beauty is just my feeling versus your feeling, then how can anyone be wrong? How can we even have a real conversation about it? It seems like we're stuck. But this is where Hume's argument gets really, really smart. This is the big hurdle he has to jump, right? If beauty is just a feeling, how can one person's taste possibly be better than another's? How do we bridge that gap from I like it to it is good?
Hume's solution is brilliant. He says we need to separate two different ways of looking at things. On one side, you've got your personal view. This is what he calls a false relish. It's biased. Maybe you're in a bad mood, or maybe the artist is your best friend. That's going to color your judgment. But on the other side is the general view. This is where you try to step outside of yourself, forget your personal situation, and see the artwork from a more universal perspective, as a man in general.
And that is the absolute key. To really judge a piece of art, you have to leave your own peculiar circumstances at the door. You have to find what he calls a steady and general point of view. It's not about pretending beauty isn't a feeling. It's about making sure that feeling is pure and not all twisted up by your personal biases.
Okay, so this general point of view sounds great, but how do we find it? What is this so-called standard of taste? You might think it's a checklist of rules, but Hume says nope. The standard isn't a what, it's a who.
For Hume, the standard of taste is the joint verdict, the collective agreement of these qualified judges he calls true critics. It's not about some rule written in a book. It's about the consensus that these experienced people come to over a long, long time. Their shared judgment is what separates the timeless masterpieces from the forgotten fads.
So, what makes someone a true critic? Well, Hume gives us this 5-point checklist. First, you need a good brain, strong sense, and a refined sensibility, what he calls delicate sentiment, which is just the ability to notice the little things. Second, you've got to put in the time. That means tons of practice, seeing and engaging with art. Third, you need comparison, which means you're not just looking at one thing in a vacuum, you're judging it against other great works. And finally, number 5, you have to be cleared of all prejudice. You have to be able to step back and take that general point of view we were just talking about. It's a tall order.
But Hume wasn't naive. He knew that even the absolute best critics aren't going to agree on everything. And that's okay. He calls these blameless differences. You know, some people are just naturally going to prefer comedy over tragedy. Your cultural background is going to shape your tastes. So the standard isn't about creating an army of identical art judging robots. It allows for some wiggle room, some personal variation.
All right, let's put this whole theory to the test with a really fascinating puzzle. If art is all about the feeling of pleasure, why on earth do we love stories that make us feel awful? I mean, why do we line up to watch tragedies that make us feel sad or even horrified?
Hume puts the question so well. Why are we pleased in proportion as we are afflicted? It's a wild thought, isn't it? The more the story rips our hearts out, the more we seem to love it. How does that make any sense?
Okay, so Hume's explanation is this really cool psychological idea called the conversion theory. Here's the gist. He thinks a really strong emotion can actually absorb a weaker opposite emotion and kind of convert it. So with the tragedy, the pleasure you get from the incredible artistry, the amazing acting, the beautiful language, that's the dominant feeling. It's so strong that it grabs onto the weaker feeling of sadness from the plot, and it transforms that sadness, making the overall pleasure even more powerful and intense.
And this really breaks it down. In a great tragedy, think Shakespeare. The pleasure you get from the pure genius of it is the main event. It's the dominant emotion. It takes that sadness and supercharges the experience. But what about a failed tragedy, one that's just gruesome and poorly made? Well, then the negative feelings, the disgust, the horror, they become dominant. They completely overwhelm any tiny bit of pleasure you might have gotten, and you just leave feeling gross. It's all about which emotion wins out. The balance is everything.
So in the end, Hume gives us this really empowering idea. Good taste isn't something you're just born with. It's a skill. It's something you can actually work on and develop over time. It's less about being right and more about becoming a more perceptive and thoughtful critic. So let me leave you with this. Think about something you really love. Could be movies, music, video games, whatever. Looking back at Hume's qualities for a true critic, what's just one step you could take to start sharpening your own taste and deepen your appreciation for it?